Here in India, when you're riding a Royal Enfield motorcycle, irrespective of what model it may be, to most people, you're riding a Bullet. Doesn't matter if you're on a Classic, a Hunter, a Meteor, to the average Indian layperson, it's all a Bullet. And you can see why. When you've had a model in production for nearly a century, that model tends to become synonymous with the company itself. And so now we have an all-new Bullet. And even though this is no longer Royal Enfield's best-selling motorcycle, it's still a very important bike for the company. And here's what this latest one is like. Even in the previous generation, the Bullet and the Classic had quite a lot in common. But this time around, they're near identical, as you can probably tell just by looking at them. The Bullet is now built on the same J-platform architecture as the Classic, so you've got the same engine housed in the same frame, sprung on the same suspension. The engine in question is Enfield's 349cc air-cooled single, and that is great news. Because if you're not intent on living life in the fast lane, this is about as good as engines get at this price point. Torquey, easygoing, smooth, brimming with character and churning out a great exhaust note. This laid-back character is backed up by the chassis too, which offers great ride quality and does a top job of keeping you well isolated from the mess underneath. And while this is definitely no corner carver, like the Classic, it is pretty tolerant and obliging if you decide to hustle it through some bends. There are a few differences here as well, so let's talk about those. The first is the handlebar. Royal Enfield has tweaked the handlebar to give you a slightly more upright riding position than on the Classic. The next difference, probably the biggest visual difference, is the seat. You've got a single-piece seat here as opposed to the split seats on the Classic. There's a little more padding here as well, so Royal Enfield says the seat height is up slightly, even though on paper that number is the same. And coming around to the back, the final two differences are the fender. The rear fender is now more squared off, you see this angle here, and the tail lamp housing. This is what's different. The tail lamp itself is the same as the Classic. From the saddle, the two differences that you feel are the seat and the handlebar. The bar does seem to be a little higher up, but they appear to have done this by angling the handlebar away from you, which has resulted in what feels like a slightly longer forward reach to the handlebar. I'm 5'8" tall and I found a slight strain in my shoulders from this forward reach, and I don't quite remember this being the case on board the Classic. On the upside, the seat here has more padding than on the Classic, and that seems to help. My backside remained comfortable even after cross-city commutes, while the Classic's standard seats do tend to make you soar a little sooner. Personally, I would have liked to see a little more differentiation with the Bullet. This top variant, especially with all its blacked out bits, the engine, the exhaust, the wheel rims, looks a lot like a Classic, perhaps a little too close. The lower variants of the Bullet actually do a better job of bringing in a more unique Bullet identity. With single-tone paint schemes, more chrome and no hood over the headlight, the lower versions of the Bullet do a little more to differentiate themselves from the Classic. Today, the Bullet is closer to the Classic than it ever has been before, and that has its positives and negatives. On the upside, you still get the lovely, pleasant, laid-back riding experience that you do on the Classic. But it feels like this Bullet lacks a little identity of its own. And the similarities to the Classic also mean that prices have gone up quite a bit. And now the dual-channel Bullet is more or less on par with the dual-channel Classic. This is by no means a poor motorcycle, it's actually quite a nice motorcycle, but I do wish it was a little more unique. On the upside, if you're looking at a single-channel motorcycle, then the single-channel Bullet gives you essentially everything the single-channel Classic does for about 20,000 rupees less.